Hey, Ivan just sent a message what he's running a few minutes late, so let's wait a couple of more minutes to see if our server will join. But Mike Brown is in Slack is away. Have you had a chance to chat with him lately after he's back from vacation?
So no, but he was. So
Yep.
when was he present? So he was present in some.
It was
meeting.
before his vacation, I believe.
Okay.
Or it was another meeting. So.
But I see he is away in the Slack. So I wonder if he's
Yeah,
at work.
I guess many of those guys are having this really longer Thanksgiving vacation than just 4 days.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, Evan.
Hello.
Oh.
Evan, I think I have only one topic. Well, actually, Christian had only one topic about this CDI API improvements. Do we have anything else we want to chat about today?
Not from our side or from my side. I think we did also talk about some of the stuff yesterday morning in the sort of weekly meeting that we're having regarding the CEP. I think from, nothing specific. So Christian, do you want to start with your topic?
Yeah. So so basically, so 2 weeks ago we discussed that there are some. So all of us had some dislikes with the current API, and there were some bugs in the implementation and some things that were not clear. So basically, then I promised that I will make a proposal for an update. And for me, I'm that kind of guy that I have a hard time making a proposal if I don't know whether it feels like a good API if I implement it and you write some code against it. So that's what I did. So I tried to roll some small implementation and basically so API that feels more intuitive to me than the current one. And that's what I shared with you guys. There are still a couple of things. So there are a couple of things related to this that I think is still unclear. So, but those are related mostly to how the spec is laid out currently and the current implementation. So mostly those are related to this short name and short kind. So the existing implementation doesn't use them. So if you use a short name and a short kind, and you try to refer to the devices using those, it will not work in the existing implementation. And I didn't implement it either. It can be added, but I was thinking that this is maybe one of those things that we might want to remove.
Yeah, I think so from my side, I'm busy going through the pull request that you opened now as well. So yeah, and I think that as we discussed, I think 2 weeks ago, we said that it probably makes sense to remove the functionality to support like the short name and short kind. Yeah. And rather add it add that functionality than to implement that now without having a better, let's say, feeling for or understanding of how the API will actually be used. And yeah, I think let's rather leave it, especially if it's not really implemented in the current API anyway.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. So none of those fields are. I couldn't find any reference to it in the code.
Okay, you mean okay? So because it has the aliases, right? Basically, let's say there's the yeah. No, that's fine. Then leave it, and then we can add that as
So
an
in the
enhancement,
structures-
pumping the version.
So in the structures, you do have those fields, but the code doesn't reference any of those fields. So I doubt that it would be implemented.
I would remove them.
Yeah, I think that
So
would
it
be
would
good.
complicate API. Well, not
Yeah.
very much, but why do we need it? We have a name, so in
Yeah.
kind it's
So,
kind of
yes.
indexes.
So if we want something like that, then my suggestion would be that maybe, so if we want something like that, then I think it would be a better idea that implicitly you can use without the vendor, the device type, as long as it is unique. So for instance, if NVIDIA would provide CDI files where the devices would be called something like nvidia.com/GPU equals something, then you could say just GPU equals something, and it would work as long as that's unique across all installed CDI specs. So this is something that might make sense to me, but I would not add it now because I think this is premature. So like Evan told, before we know how this API is getting more used in a sort of more widespread sense, then I think all this is sort of futile to add. So it's better to sort of expose it to a larger public that they can use it, and then based on some feedback, then we can make changes and not the other way around.
I wouldn't go like for like implementing this that you said, like referencing without vendor or like just by the part of the key, because it can create kind of strange behavior, I would say. So that's like those files are supposed to be added at any time. So and like imagine that like your client worked and then suddenly it stopped working just because some
Somebody
file was
put there
added to the
something.
file system. I don't know. I wouldn't go.
I agree that we should not implement it now. So yes, I agree with that.
Okay, yeah, I think let's be more prescriptive to start with, and as I say, we can always add functionality, especially now that we are in this early stage that we don't have that much adoption. But sort of having this functionality in and people starting to use it, then there's going to be possibly more pushback if we take something away that causes too many problems, right? So let's be more prescriptive, require fully qualified device identifiers. So vendor class, I think you used in the pull request, and ID or name of the device to select a device from a given spec.
Sounds reasonable to me.
And I think even like what we call the meta devices, right? Like we were talking about the all or whatever, we can also not consider for the current API either. So
basically it is indirectly implemented now, if you look at it. It's not implemented as all, but it is implemented so that so you can give a wildcard in the device name. And if you call basically this inject with that, then it will inject all matching ones.
That's even
so
better from my point
it
of view.
globs. It globs basically.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah. That's then that the semantics. That just means that we need to add some, if we want like a special string all to be handled as a star, right? Then that needs to be added at some point. But I think the star is fine. And like this is intended, at least I think, also to be used in like a Kubernetes environment where users are not typically selecting all either, right? They're selecting specific devices, and the various device plugins are specifying at some stage, once we have the CDI plumbing enabled, are selecting specific devices based on their IDs, and adding the vendor and class there. Class per vendor is not is then required, but it's not. I don't think that's a blocker for moving forward and getting this used.
So basically, Christian, you implemented everything. So we just need to
Well-
like review your PR, maybe play with it and merge. So those parts that you mentioned that you didn't implement, they are actually not needed, right?
Well, there is one thing that I think is needed. So I added the API for this automatic refresh, but I didn't really implement it. So a little bit of code is missing that it will auto. So manual refresh is now there. So you can say that, hey, refresh for me so this atomic operation that you want to make sure that, for instance, when you are injecting two devices and you call twice the library and you want to make sure that you are operating on the same set of data, that now works so that it's not automatically refreshing itself. And if you want, then before that you can refresh. But I think that with Sasha, we discussed that this automatic refresh we also would like to have. And that's so the place and the API calls to enable and disable that is there, but I didn't plug in the implementation to really do it. There is some commented out code. So that's something that if we want, then it still needs to be implemented, but I think it's
But
pretty simple.
what's the use case for this automatic refresh?
Is the runtime, I think. But that's true that with the runtime, you can do it also the other. So I think the only use case, to be honest, why I wanted to have that, the only use case would be this. I added, so if you look at the code, so there is a small utility, command line utility written with Cobra that you can use to query basically the CDI registry.
Yeah,
And I added
saw
there
that.
a command which is monitor. And the only real use case I had in mind for that is that, okay, you could monitor basically that if you copy in a new file and take out, then how it will change the behavior. So how it will, for instance,
Well,
change.
I would prefer explicit things, at least at the beginning. So we can complicate it like later on, but like let's start with manual only.
Okay, but then okay, that's at least for me, that's fine.
So, I mean, and that monitor utility could be, I suppose, written to force to just reread the spec, right? So, I mean, instead of
and do the monitoring in that command itself instead of the library.
Yeah.
So yes, true. Yes.
Yeah.
Christian, actually, I wanted to ask about this utility. What's your plan for it? Is it just like for debugging, or you had some functionality in mind?
I think it was just for debugging. So for instance, I was using it so that I wanted to see that if I create some files, and then so it has this kind of thing that you can say to it that, hey, here is a OCI spec, do for me the injection and show me how it will look like. And that's what I have been using to, so I have some unit tests, but that's what I have been really using to see that it behaves the way I want. And I think that's a sort of a debugging aid in my opinion.
Would it make sense to add like few helper subcommands to a utility for like sysadmin use case? So for example,
if
like
you have some in mind, yes.
Very basic one. So if input is device name, when to show from which JSON files it takes for sections.
It's already implemented.
Okay, good.
Because this was needed. So I mean, because there are several direct. So one change that I made is that there are now several directories where it can read specs from. This is a little bit related to one of the issues opened by Kevin. So he was saying that there should be a directory which is sort of owned by a vendor. So I think what he had in mind is that that vendor will put the runtime generated CDI specs in that directory. And I didn't want to implement it that way, but I wanted to implement it that way that you can have as many directories as you want, and the later ones are overriding the earlier. So you can have that kind of setup as he wants, but it's not so that it's exactly as he wanted, but the functionality is the same. And because of this, then I added that I wanted to make sure that the user can easily find out that where is a device pulled in from which spec file. And that's why I added already this functionality.
Okay.
But do you have something else in mind?
Kevin, is it satisfying your idea? Or?
Sorry, I was only half listening, admittedly. Can you say it again?
So you have one issue open where you were saying that you would like to have the ability for CDI to somehow mark one directory that it's owned by a vendor, and then the vendor specific files would be pulled in somehow from that. And the runtime generated ones would go in there, and then that would override basically the static ones which are in some other directory.
I don't remember having. I just don't remember this issue.
Okay, you opened it sometimes in 2020, so I think it was a long time ago.
I think the one I really remember opening was the one around just in general the having the ability to have an automatically generated CDI spec that is potentially generated on the fly as it's being requested. So instead of reading a file, calling out to an executable. But I don't remember if I had anything around what you just mentioned.
Just a second, I have to check which one was. Add notion of vendor-owned directories to the CDI spec. It was filed by you.
Can you send me the link? I just want to refresh my memory on it.
Yeah, I think that's not. If looking at the issue, I think it's not. I think it's not where the spec is located, but it's actually a spec enhancement, right? So the description talks about proc driver NVIDIA, which for our purposes, that's a special folder in the container on the host in the container, right? And we need to be able to make other kinds of modifications to that that may not be expressible in the spec as it exists.
Yeah, the idea was the idea there was to be able to say in the spec that these directories should not be something that.
So mask out from that.
Basically.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it didn't have anything to do with the layout of where the directories are
for
the spec itself. Yeah.
Okay.
But if it's inside container, can it be solved with injecting like mount points or like fake empty directory mount points?
Well, the thing is that let me think for a second. So I just got to refresh my memory. So I know the issue with the proc folders one. So let me just start talking through what needs to be done on the NVIDIA side. So what we currently do in our hook is for proc driver NVIDIA, we basically take control of that folder knowing that we're going to have some hook that maybe runs later to do something over top of it, which will be mounting our own tempfs over it, selectively mounting some of the same files there, and maybe not mounting others. But the whole point was that if we need to do that inside of a hook or some other mechanism, we don't want CDI or whatever runtime is implementing it to be doing anything on top of those directories. You basically want to mark them somehow as being owned by us as a vendor so that no one else can inject something on top of it or mount something on top of it, for example. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm just thinking. So
basically, if let's say that we're doing this on Docker, if someone put a -v to one of the folders that was in the CDI spec for this, Docker would error out saying you can't mount something there.
Yeah. Problem is that within the CDI itself, so this I can imagine how it could, so I can see how this could be done with CDI plus an NRI plugin if our NRI exercises are going forward, because that would be the perfect vehicle for this, but just with CDI itself.
Christian, with CDI, it sounds like what, let's say, if in the spec we see what this folder is protected, when it means when we are injecting this device, we need to go through all the mounts already present in OCI spec and see if it overlaps.
Yeah.
And when error out if we found some overlap. So theoretically, yes, it's doable, and I don't know if it's proper scope or not. I don't know.
I think it's definitely not out of scope for this particular exercise, I would say. I think it's definitely an enhancement.
It's more of a, I wanted to have it documented that this is something that will potentially need to support at some point. But if it doesn't work right away, the workaround is just tell the user, don't mount something there, right? So
Well, Docker doesn't allow you to mount in /proc anyway.
slash proc anyway.
Yeah, so there's that. But yeah.
So that actually raises me another question I wanted to ask. So should we have in the CDI spec some information kind of fields? So like this directory is a good example, and I was thinking more from perspective of, let's say, like preferred CPU, preferred memory regions for devices which dependent on those. So like some kind of hint provider, and actually maybe with some preferences list. We cannot use it directly. Like, I mean, like we cannot inject that field directly in the OCI spec, but if it's processed by like something else in the pipeline, it might be useful information. Like you said, with direct protected directory.
Yeah, just some way to declare this stuff, and then something else could consume it. Not our CDI helpers themselves, but something else.
Yeah,
so
these not annotations or labels then basically? Like
we can inject that as annotations for further processing inside OCI spec.
Maybe you think maybe something more structured.
On CDI spec, I thought more structured. But when we are passing that information, we can use either annotation field or, I don't know, or maybe later on propose something to OCI spec. Anyway, we don't need to get solution right now. It's just like the idea for thinking.
So I think it's definitely doable. So I mean, if and once we come up with something like that, then I think it should be easy to add.
Yeah, I'll try to formulate the idea and then open the issue for it, so we can discuss it as an issue.
Yeah, I think I think all of these. I think once we start, one of the things that's on my still long to-do list, although I might actually just address it in the next week or look at it next week, because just to get it moving, especially once Christian's pull request is merged or has some additional feedback or reaches a state where it's consumable. It already looks very good. Is to sort of try this with the Podman implementation, for example, and specs that I generate for NVIDIA devices, because that's sort of our one call it container engine or runtime that supports CDI is Podman. But I think the support there definitely needs to be sort of taken from like an end-to-end test needs to be done with it, and the shortcomings in the integration needs to be pointed out. So I think it would be, once we do that with a couple of use cases, this will also inform these kinds of decisions as to like, well, okay, it works, but there are these caveats around how this behaves differently to our current implementation, for example. And I'm sure that's going to come up with Containerd and Cryo as well, with the work that Ed is doing.
So speaking of which, Ed, can you update what is going on your side?
Nothing. I'm still waiting for feedback, guys, and maybe we should discuss. I was actually hoping to talk with Mike Brown about it on this meeting, but I don't know. Maybe I should contact him like separately and discuss it. So was waiting for some feedback from him, because so far we've got slightly negative feedback. I would say that it's better to do it with NRI, which is okay, like for me, but I don't know. The one concern is the time. So how long would it take? So we decided to propose like this simple solution as a kind of short-term solution, and then when NRI is ready, then like switch to it. But we need to find a way to actually I don't know, convince the containerd maintainers that it makes sense, but I don't know how to do that.
But wasn't it really Akihiro who was sort of more opposing the idea than Mike Brown? At least based on the discussion, that was the.
Yeah.
So maybe we should talk to him.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
I don't know.
I'm going to talk with Mike then. At least point him out to the PR and ask to review it, and remind our decision, like to go both ways. So let's see.
So we can try to contact Akihiro as well and just say to him directly what if he can help with speeding up NRI review and acceptance, then yes, we definitely can do it in NRI. But if not, then yes, we need to have some temporary solution.
Yeah. Well, I will contact Mike and ask for help first. Then we'll see how it goes.
Just one question. Looking at the containerd pull request again, so this relies on the spec modifications that are currently defined in the let's call it the OCI package, right? Or the utilities that are provided there that Christian is currently busy working on. Do we think that this, like, given the discussion around this pull request, is Christian's sort of like revamp of the API considered a requirement for getting this in? Or do we feel confident to go through the process of opening another pull request with the vendor version bumps and modifications, although probably minor since it's restricted to sort of the spec.op Linux source file where the device modifications are or the spec modifications are actually made. Or should we wait for at least until, let's say, the next meeting, and then by that time have Christian's modifications to the API merged? Maybe we can even sort of tag that as version 0.3.0 or whatever, and then use that in the containerd pull request. Does that make sense, or does that reduce friction or increase friction, I suppose, from our perspective?
I think it makes sense to wait, because well, it shouldn't take long to actually accept Christian's PR, and it's much clearer and much more useful API. So like for current PR, like for the client side, it's not so important actually, but anyway, just to avoid confusion among containerd maintainers, it would be better to use it. But then I have another part, which is kind of like core containerd. Then that processes these CRI requests, and in that part of containerd, we definitely need to use this new API, because old one is kind of not going to work there, just because it's not cached, like because of almost all disadvantages that we were pointing out.
Okay, so our priority now is to basically get the API revamp in, so that can also unblock sort of the final version of, let's call it final in air quotes, version of these containerd integrations.
Yes.
Okay.
I would say cool. Yes. And Christian, one thing that I don't know, it's not a like don't take as a criticism, but I was kind of like looking at the API, and there are a lot of exported methods. So either like some documentation is needed, even like short one, just pointing out, or we should hide part of the API if it's like for just for the sake of simplicity.
Yes. So most of the exporting happened basically to be able to write this utility.
Yeah.
That you can use to basically interact and look at the registry. So for instance, listing vendors and these kind of things. I don't expect any Podman or any containerd or any such client to need it. So it's a good question that are those really needed? But if you want to have this kind of CDI utility, which is currently there, then it's needed. But so I don't know. I can write. So what I can do, I can write a little bit more. So I can write some documentation about it, and then we can decide if it's considered basically useless. Then we will just hide it. So or remove those that are not needed.
I would not put it this way. I would rather consider like the minimum useful subset of it. So everything is useful, but just like for the sake of simplicity and like easiness to understand the API by users, whoever they are. So it would be better to at least start with the like very small subset of API calls. It's just from my point of view, so it's debatable. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, I think that there are. So I don't even know whether there are two or just one function which are really neat. So one is the refresh, of course, when you want to say that now reload for me the specs. The other is there are. So I don't know. So one is basically which is injecting devices. That is to be used on the client side. If your client knows that I want to inject the following CDI devices, then the Podman API is implemented so that it is passing separately the CDI device slice and the OCI spec. But I don't, if you think about a device plugin, I also added this resolve, which is like inject, but it goes through those devices which are already in the OCI spec, tries to find out about those devices which are CDI devices, and then replacing inside the OCI spec those that turned out to be CDI devices with the CDI equivalent.
And how it does it? By just comparing the device node name?
No.
Node path?
It expects fully qualified device name to be used instead. So that, I mean, there is no ambiguity in that sense. So it needs to be explicit. Because otherwise, I think it doesn't make much sense. Then it becomes a sort of guessing game. So then it's not good. But what I don't know is that I never tried to write a device plugin, so a Kubernetes device plugin, which would really try to physically inject a CDI fully qualified reference as a device and see whether it comes through the full pipeline, or is there some verification in between where it's basically rejected. So if there is something in between where it's rejected, then this resolve is, then either that rejection needs to be addressed so that it doesn't happen, or this resolve doesn't make any sense and then it needs to be removed.
Or resolve needs to happen before this check.
Yeah, in the device plugin.
Not in device plugin, but in the pipeline. So Kubernetes, I remember, it doesn't validate all of those, but the CRI plugin and containerd and CRI might validate the data structure what we are getting through CRI protocol.
But
I mean, is it run C that complains about the device not being present, or is it something else, right? I believe the spec has already been generated for that, which contains actual devices. So that resolution needs to happen before the spec is being generated to pass to run C or C run or whatever.
Yeah. So the problem is what CRI protocol includes only device pass on both on the host side and in the container side, but nothing more. And OCI spec require always like major, minor, peripheral permission and so on. And this is done in Cryo, and this is done in CRI plugin on the container key side. So we need to look at this piece of code which transforms the CRI data structure to OCI data structure.
Again, that's because we're overloading the device command line argument from a CLI perspective, right? Or I suppose from the Kubernetes perspective, in a device plugin, the modifications that are made to the spec that's being launched.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Anyway, it's good to just to verify are we getting any problems or not.
But yeah, I think then if resolve seems to be a more complex functionality, like that could also, if our goal is to reduce the complexity of the API in at least the initial version, then like if it doesn't make sense to have that in, or there's a lot of edge cases there, then one could also make it internal only and then maybe expose it later, or at least add, as Ed also said, just add more concrete or clear doc strings so that the API becomes more documented. Like I haven't looked at the documentation for resolve. I'm still working through the pull request, but well, yeah, that's my thoughts there.
Regarding the documentation, so I completely agree with that about this function prototypes and putting some meaningful doc strings where. What this reminds me is what Christian, in your PR, I saw what you added like minimal lint comments. But maybe Ed, can I ask you to like copy from our device plugins like best practices for Golang CI linter? So
you mean configuration for this tool that
yeah,
we are using?
configuration
Set of rules that it's using like for the checks. Yeah, okay, I can do
so that. This will help with like this complexity, with all these missing comments, with phrasing of the comments. I think we had some good rule set.
Yeah. As for Kubernetes integration, do you think, guys, we need to do that as well in near future, or that can wait? I mean, integration with the existing device plugins.
Yeah,
basically passing this ID of devices to Kubernetes.
Ed, but this is where it's so I think we should really find out whether this resolve can work or not, because I have to say that from the API modification and every other point of view, the resolve type of approach is much less intrusive than the inject type of approach, because the inject requires that you are passing basically out of band an extra set of information through the full pipeline. And the whole idea with resolve is that let's try to avoid that. So let's try to pretend that those are normal devices and we are basically hiding extra information in the device name. And then let's try to interpret it at the other end of the pipeline. So that if that works, then the protocol would not need to be touched. And I think that would be great, because knowing that how difficult that is. So I have to say that we could proceed much faster if that we can avoid, in my opinion. That's why I try to add it, but this part is missing. So I don't know who would be the best guy to. What we would need to do is basically write a CDI, a device plugin which is injecting a CDI device and then test it whether it goes through the pipeline. I can do it if nobody else is willing to do it.
Ed probably can do it faster.
I think also that Ed could do it really fast.
Did I understand you correctly that Kubernetes should do this in this not injection but this resolving?
Not even that. What I meant is that because I think that ultimately the nicest solution would be if that would be done in the runtime. So in kubelet, the whole infrastructure wouldn't need to know about CDI at all in this sense. And the device plugin itself could choose whether it injects a already resolved device or a CDI reference. And the CDI reference would come in.
What's the difference?
So the difference is that either the host pass or the container pass, I don't remember which one, but one of them should be actually, instead of a /dev node, it should be the CDI name.
Host pass was agreement.
Yeah, the host pass.
Okay.
And then the rest of the infrastructure would stay on. So if this comes through intact to the runtime, then the resolution could happen in the runtime. And if this works, then also the clients would not need to be touched. So as long as on the client side, there is no that kind of rejection that, hey, you try to use this kind of device, but I'm so smart that I see that there is no such device, so I will not even ask the runtime. So if this kind of rejection is not there, then that would automatically work also for all the clients. So none of the clients would need to be modified either.
So let me make sure I understand this. So the plugin would on the fly generate a CDI spec for just the devices it wanted to inject for this container.
It
And
doesn't
then
matter
pass,
whether it's
and then pass
runtime
the,
generated or not.
and then pass the path to it.
It doesn't. No, it doesn't.
Not
So
a
it
pass,
would,
ID.
so in the host pass, it would put a CDI ID and that's it. Whether then for the spec for that is runtime generated or static, it doesn't matter from this discussion point of view. That's a sort of separate issue, I think.
And then kubelet would pass it like through CRI to the runtime, and runtime will do like the rest of work, actually updating the spec.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so it's just instead of passing, let's say /dev/NVIDIA 0 as a concrete example, in our case, it would be the devices that are injected into the spec by the device plugin would be nvidia.com/GPU equals GPU 0, right?
Exactly.
Assuming GPU 0 is the ID associated. And the spec generation is left as an exercise to the user. I mean, either it's statically generated for a given node at provisioning or whatever, and the runtime is configured to also read the same spec that is,
I mean, yes,
that would understand that ID, right? Like that's
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, from
I guess
from this mechanism point of, sorry, go ahead.
I'm trying to understand. So the plugin API, the things you can set are environment variables, volumes, annotations, and I think there's one more
devices.
thing. And set of devices. So what are we actually setting here? That's the piece I'm missing.
The
somehow.
devices. That would
in
be the
device-
devices.
Device ID.
In devices field, let me see. So in devices structure, we are not populating container path. We can put whatever we want into the permission mode, but into the host path variable or field of that struct, we are putting device ID. So on runtime side, when we get this structure from kubelet, we are looking at the host path. If it's CDI ID, when we are injecting the.
So we would set host path to just say the number 0 or something.
No, to nvidia.com/GPU equal GPU 0.
Okay, so we're kind of misusing in some ways the device spec.
Kind of, yeah. Well, of course, we can use other functionality, like we can use annotation to pass that ID. But no. It's less.
I at least understand what you're saying now. I know one of the big pushbacks in the past about a lot of this stuff was that the people that were not CDI specifically, but when we've talked about other mechanisms we tried to propose, the biggest pushback was that they wanted a well-defined path that wasn't by environment variables, wasn't defined, wasn't by some, misuse in some ways of how it was intended to be used mechanism so you could easily follow the path of what was being injected all the way down to the bottom. It's part of the reason that, the idea of using annotations was rejected a couple of years ago. I know it just feels a bit weird to be not introducing something new here, but
yeah, but I think your comment is valid for like the end user perspective. So like, yes, it was not good to use annotation in the pod spec to
from the end user.
Yeah. But this internal data structure just between the kubelet and device plugin kubelet and then runtime, but it's a different story. It's never visible to the end user. And even in the described pod situation or described container situation, you don't see those.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I at least understand them. I don't have a strong opinion at the moment, other than it feels a bit odd.
So,
yeah, we can
Kevin,
keep
if-
talking about it. Yeah, go ahead.
if I remember correctly, Windows guys on the device part in the CRI, we're also using something similar. So I think we're on the host pass. We don't have a pass to device. We have ID, which Windows resolves.
Yeah, it was something like that because Windows doesn't have the notion of a /dev node or whatever.
Yes, exactly. So what we are proposing, we exactly the same scenario.
Mhm.
So for pass, we ID through one of those fields.
Okay. Yeah, I at least understand. I was getting lost in where this would be set as we were talking about it a minute ago, but now I get it. Yeah.
I mean, like whether it is correct or not from a functionality perspective, the CDI spec as defined in the examples actually states that the -- device flag is the way to communicate with the runtimes, right? Or the container engines, Podman or Docker or container, I suppose the CTR part of container D, right? Like that's
So in that sense, it would be overloading the whatever device spec means anyway, even on the not Kubernetes, but the runtime
device path. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But with container D clients, we need to be a bit careful. Mike Brown in some other discussion, he explained it what like container D is built on the principle what the clients are actually like fat clients. So like with CTR, with Docker and so on, we are responsible to create the spec, like the OCI spec practically. So we might still need to do the modifications where to just pass this value to the like bottom layers, and then in the bottom layers we are expanding it to the real device. But I think it's actually one of the problems with that step 2 on the CTR pull request.
Yeah. Maybe just a summary. So Ed or Christian, you're going to look at how this works, whether this works if we set a device ID from a device plugin and see whether that is then triggers the correct modifications to the OCI spec and launches a container using that spec, right? And do we limit ourselves to a particular runtime there? I suppose because that would be the thing that needs to have the changes in place, right? So container D, I would assume.
So if Ed writes that kind of
or cryo.
So if Ed basically, if we get that kind of device plugin, then I can test it with either containerd or cryo, because for both containerd and cryo, I have this experimental NRI integration, and for NRI, I have written a CDI injector plugin, which is basically resolving. It assumes that it's this resolve type of mode that it needs to work. So it doesn't take extra information, but it goes through the devices present. So the host passes of the devices present in the OCI request and tries to resolve. See if those are CDI devices, and if they are, then tries to resolve them.
So Christian, you mentioned that you already did it. I mean, like when we were discussing that, like the passing something which is not the actual device pass, like wouldn't work. You said that you tested it and it worked.
I was cheating, Ed. What I did, I had 2 NRI plugins.
Okay.
The first one was reading annotations, and from the annotation was doing device injection. And there I was cheating. So it did not come through. It came through as an annotation over the CRI protocol. Then first one plugin, which was hooked in earlier than the CDI resolver, was injecting the devices, and some of those could be CDI. So it works both for CDI and non-CDI. And then I hooked in after that the CDI resolver, and in the case, then it worked. But I have not verified whether that comes through intact in the CRI protocol.
Yeah, I can try. to do it.
Okay.
So that shouldn't be hard. I'm just a bit concerned with what Kevin said, that it can be rejected, like, because it looks quite hackish from my point of view. That
True, but
like
then what's
passing
such a code
something
about the
which is
Windows?
not the pass actually.
Yeah, but what about
in
the Windows guys?
yeah.
Wait.
What about the
so
Windows guys? And isn't this the same hack?
it's kind of the same hack, but well, Windows can be considered as a like different data
Hack
structure.
Well, on Windows, they don't have like actually pass to the device node, right? So they have ID. So this is kind of justifiable. But in our case, we have the pass, but we are like cheating a bit and passing something else in that field. So this,
yeah, I agree.
is
I
kind of
understand
tricky.
why yeah, so you are right, but yes. So in a way,
So-
yes, it was not originally meant for this. That's for sure.
Gentlemen, what I would suggest is first thing, let's try to see if it works or not. If not, then we will consider what we are doing. And if it doesn't work with the host pass, I would suggest to try with annotation which is set by device plugin. So the device structure in device plugin allocate response is optional field. So practically like every field is optional there. So device plugin can set annotation, and this is container level annotation. So it's not something what conflicting with the user. It's not user visible, but it's visible in runtime. So if a standard device allocate part not working, then this annotation is supposed to work as a first step. And for later stages, we need to have Patrick's cap about dynamic resource allocation and to hold this thing revisited.
But Sasha, even without it, so if this is accepted, then basically it opens a lot of opportunities for device plugin writers.
Absolutely,
So
but as I said, even with current scenario, so like imagine the host pass doesn't work. Okay, we are not going to use it. We can use the annotation, which is set by device plugin.
Okay, yeah, I can try it. But that should work, at least like passing the annotation is kind of.
I mean, if we do it by an annotation to start, we can then consider what it would take to get a, a well-defined API through the kubelet down through CRI or something.
Yeah, we can add one more field into allocate response structure or in the CRI protocol as well. So it's backward compatible change.
Yeah, but to get it to work by an annotation or host path or whatever, just to make sure that we can see it end to end, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, I will try it.
All right, gentlemen, we just have a few minutes left. What else?
No, I don't think anything. As I said, I'll try to. There's some packaging stuff for a release that I'm finishing up, but once that's done, I'm actually planning to take time off from around the middle of December. So I might use the last week and a half to sort of spend some time with Podman and its CDI integration to move that ahead a bit. I'm still trying to hear from Zvanko, who on the Podman team I can get in touch with as well, but I think there's a lot of stuff that I can do on our side to ensure that we're generating sane specs. I think there's still some open questions around the specs we generate and how we trigger hooks and things like that, but I hope to sort of address that next week. Maybe then in the meeting, the follow-up meeting, maybe I'll attend it while on vacation. But then maybe I'll have some results for that. I don't think there's anything else that's pressing to finish off before the end of the year that I can't pick up next year from the other stuff that I'm busy working on.
Patrick, I saw you updated WCAP, right? Based on Kevin's feedback.
Yeah, that's right. So my plan now is to just squash everything, do this last one word change that you suggested, and then do a full PR against the upstream enhancement repo.
Okay, well, sounds great. That's really great.
And Patrick, maybe I missed it. So are you planning to create a real cap before the meeting?
Yes,
As
yes,
Kevin suggested.
That's the plan.
Okay.
So that means filing an enhancement issue so that we have a number for the cap, and then creating a pull request with the text that came out of our internal discussion, or in my private, it's not internal, from the discussion in my private repo.
Okay, great.
Cool. I gotta run. I'll talk to you guys later.
All right, thank you everyone for participating. Talk to you later.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, Christian, I'll submit my review on your PR in the next, by tomorrow at the latest. Still going through that. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.